afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to today's policy dialogue hosted by UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, in short, MGIEP. My name is Mridul Upadhyay, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. I would like to thank you for joining us. This is our second dialogue of Talking Across Generation, which is an intergenerational space of dialogue. And we are having this series two on reimagining education, on learning, experiences, and spaces. Before we go further, I want to review the functionality of this panel discussion. Your active participation is very important throughout the session. Throughout the panel discussion, the team members will be managing the chat functionality. You can enter your questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat box throughout the presentation. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ananta K. Dorayappa, who is the director of UNESCO MGIP and a science-based policy pace setter. With over 33 years of experience in driving education for peace, sustainable development, and global citizenship. Over to you, Dr. Ananta Dorayappa.
Well, thank you very much, Midrul. I want to extend my warm gratitude to the three speakers today that we have. Ms. Divya Sharma, who's, I think, a real global citizen, as she is from India, but living in Germany and studying mathematics, subject close to my heart. And then Ms. Anam Minhas from Pakistan, looking at development studies and another subject close to my heart as well. And then we have today Professor Kim Doh-Yeon from Seoul. So thank you very much for being here. This whole idea of setting up a TAGe evolved many years ago when we noticed a vacuum of intergenerational dialogue, where we were seeing an increasing recognition of the voices of the youth that were important, and the youth were eager to engage, and youth were already mobilizing themselves in addressing many of the contemporary problems we face today. Some of the global public goods, as we might call them, climate change, inequality, and so forth and so on. And one of the, but what we found was that there wasn't so much of a good, frank, a safe space for the dialogue between the young, aspiring change makers and the policy community, or even I would broaden it to the decision-making community, which includes even captains of the industry and so forth. So this idea was set up where we identify youth among the large group of very active citizens, and then identify some very critical strategic decision makers, and then bring them together and have what we call a flat playing field or a flat dialogue field where there's no hierarchy. Everybody is at the same level, and we have a frank discussion about the issues at hand, and this has grown up. And in this particular series, we are going to be focusing on the futures of education. I think we had a crossroads. The COVID-19 has really alerted us to some of the challenges that we need to face, and how education actually has to address these challenges. The whole notion of emotional resiliency, the whole notion of digital learning and digital pedagogy, and the whole issue of trying to get across that spatial space is no longer a constraint in our learning processes. So I'm really excited to hear today's discussion. We had one earlier on, and it was a very active, interactive, and sometimes even controversial dialogue. And I think that's the whole gist of this. And I make a plea to my young colleagues today who are on this panel, as well as Professor Kim, to really go deep, do a deep dive into some of these issues. The whole notion of what do we learn, and the learning experience. How do we learn, the pedagogies? And then, of course, the learning spaces. And with the onset of digital learning, the whole virtual world is becoming now a reality. So with that, I hand over back to Midrul, and I'm really excited to listen to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duryappa. Moving right along, it's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's dialogue. We have our very own Simon Kuany.
Hi, everybody.
Over to you.
Thank you, Mridul, and thank you, Anantha, for setting the context with regards to why we need the TAGe and why such discussions or dialogic spaces are needed. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to day 2, Talking Across Generation Series 2 on reimagining education. In the previous dialogue, we focused on the key components of learning experience. And we investigated whether these components lead to happiness, fulfillment, or flourishing of everybody, especially the learners. And where we found that they do not, we also investigated what could be done about them to ensure that they lead to flourishing. And today we will deep dive into the learning space, and in this dialogue we are using, or we are defining, learning space as any place where learning takes place. And given the role of technology and given the times that we are in, we will now try and understand learning spaces in the physical sense, and then of course learning spaces in the digital sense, and try and explore interactions between these. We will also try and again ask the same questions. Are learning spaces of the past, of today, leading to flourishing or peace or sustainability or happiness or well-being? And if they are not, what do we need to do about each of them? And to explore this, I have a wonderful panel, and I would be introducing them one at a time before we just get into it. First, I will begin by introducing Ms. Anam Minhas from Pakistan. Anam is currently an MPhil scholar at Aga Khan University, Institute for Education Development in Pakistan. She has been associated with and working professionally in the education sector since 2016, and she focuses on developing inclusive education practices and youth capacity building strategies. Anam?
Thank you so much, Kuany, and a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us. Looking forward to this interesting dialogue.
Wonderful. And second, we have Ms. Divya Sharma from India, Germany. She switches between the two, so she's pretty much a global citizen. Divya is Ada Lovelace Research Fellow at the Department of Mathematics, University of Munster, Germany. She aspires to engage with the contemporary issues of globalization and international development in education sector to cross-examine evidence-based research and its use in policy. Divya?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kuany, for such a elaborative introduction, and looking forward for a nice discussion.
Wonderful. And keeping the spirit of the intergenerational component of TAGe, we are joined by Professor Doh-Yeon Kim. Professor Kim is Professor Emeritus of Seoul National University, and he is also a former Minister of Education, Science and Technology, Republic of Korea, and among many other things, being a stalwart in the education field, Professor Kim is also the member of the International Commission for the Futures of Education Initiative of UNESCO. Professor Kim, welcome to Live Dialogue 2.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, as introduced, my name is Kim. And indeed, there are too many Kims in Korea, right? 1/5 of Koreans are Kim, and I'm one of them. It is very nice and great pleasure to participate in TAGe dialogue. I like very much the subject of dialogue, reimagining education. That's true. That the education, we have to reimagine about it. And I would like to listen and learn the opinions and concerns of young generations, particularly about the education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kim. We're also looking forward, of course, to learning from you and your experiences, having been a student, a professor, a minister, and now also a scholar of education. And wonderful. So with that, let's get into it right away. And I would want to begin with, and before I do that, just housekeeping rules. Everybody, the Q&A tab is to be used for specific questions to any specific member of my esteemed panel. So you can say, Divya, this is my question to you. Professor Kim, this is my question to you. Or Anam, this is my question to you. And I'll try and pick those and interlace them into the discussion. If we are not able to do that, I guarantee you we will try and answer most of them at the end. And for questions that are general, you can also just say, here's my general question, and I'll try and pick any relevant speaker to try and address them. Before I proceed, I want to underscore that for previous dialogue, Live Dialogue 1, we discussed a lot of things that make us very unhappy about our learning experiences. This is, of course, not an underappreciation of the entire education system. So no, don't take it that way. We are very much grateful to some things that the education system has contributed. And our focus is just that we want to focus on the things that need to be changed. And so that's where we are going to try and, put our energy, things that need to be changed. So if you hear us speaking a lot about the negative parts of the education systems, do know that our intention is try and make those better. And of course, not at all a disregard of the good things that education systems might have done. And having said that, of course, personally, I'm biased against the education system. I'm going to try and keep my biases in check as much as I can. But when they do come out, do also know that I am in the field of education and I'm trying to do something about it. And so when it is negative, do know that I'm trying to do something about it as well. With that, I would start with Anam. Anam, what was your experience with the spaces where you went to learn in Pakistan? You can start from school, from high school, as well as from the university. What was it like? Were they fulfilling? Were they happy places or not?
I think I would start from my current institute, and I absolutely love it here. The reason being because everything that you just, we're trying to highlight and build towards the flaws in the system. Those are the things that my current institute has addressed. So, and even the aspect of student mental health or academic performances or publications or any such thing, and a lot of the dimensions, they are very concerned about that, and they are involved with the student on a very individual level. So I have the idea with me now of what it can be. It is achievable and quite honestly, doable and practical for other situations as well.
Oh, so Anam, if I am understanding you, are you saying it is all good that your experience was absolutely great, because I went through your comments on Facebook, and somehow you had some issues. Of course, I very much respect that you are grateful to the experience, but is it all rosy, or there are some things that you face that you're not telling us?
No, definitely not. Uh, I have come to realize that these experiences have come in stages and in phases. So yes, I have been through the tough and the hard part, and I believe that teenage years are tough, particularly for everyone. And so yes, so during school time, we obviously have had those issues, and I believe you're referring to my comment where I mentioned how I do not go well with school furniture. So I am left-handed, so I was quite unhappy about that throughout my school time, because I'd have to slouch, I'd have to uh, become like hunch over, and like just being left-handed, that created a ripple effect, whether that was during assessments, uh, or whether that was during the face-to-face learning sessions. So that is something that it perhaps it built me towards my towards inclination towards inclusive practices.
Mhm.
What are the things that are missed, because the system is so fixated on the average, as in the majority of the students, that we are treated as the outliers, you know so that has, I guess, it has played a huge part in my developmental years.
Understood. Yeah, you seem to be now painting a very balanced picture, which makes a lot of sense. No, your comment on being left-handed resonated with me, because I'm also left-handed, and going to school I had to write like this, and I got beaten a lot for that, which was something that I could not help. But it took a lot of time for my school to understand that I could do very little about it. But you do raise issues like inclusivity, which I think are things we will be unpacking a lot more. So I'll get back to you on that. Divya, building on this very fair perspective that has been put forth by Anam, what was your experience with learning spaces like?
I think it's been mixture of everything. My education in India or abroad education, all the international experience, I think taught me how learning can broaden our mental horizons, and how education or the process of learning is not just a liberating force, but it's also democratizing force as well. But sometimes I also wish like I would have learned about gender identity, privilege, how to reduce discrimination, bullying, prejudices. I mean, how we learn from each other. I mean, I did not literally have any education or any, like, let's say, small events regarding all these things. So I do miss a lot, like at least in my college time, I did miss all these things. But yeah, again, it's a mixture of everything. I won't say it is all rosy and beautiful. Yeah.
But could you be specific on the space? Could you be specific? Give us an idea, a visual idea of the space where you went for your learning. And if you could also give us the given that you've done most of your learning in India and in Germany, for example, what was it like in India? What has it been like in Germany, for
Yeah,
example?
okay. So definitely in India, I mean, I think most of us agree on that. It's mostly about content accumulation, knowledge accumulation. And there is, I think I was asked to do more introspection myself, whatever I'm learning. Like I have to do all things by myself. I think interaction was not encouraged, like cross questioning was not encouraged. And I think my abroad experience taught me you don't just have to do introspection when it comes to learning, you also do outrospection, like learning from others, how they do their learning, and how to discuss, how to have like constructive criticism, how to, um, discuss more, like group discussion. I learned from abroad experience. I mean, my subject is mathematics, and people see that, oh, I don't use mathematics in daily life. So, but like discussing mathematics in day-to-day life, I learned like more from outside abroad experiences than my education in India.
Thank you. Before I move on, just one last question on that. So Anam mentioned furniture, for example, as very restrictive, like school furniture. I was reading through the comments online. Patrick said they had to go, to their classroom was literally under a big mango tree. Along those lines, what was your space in India like? Did you have the privilege of a four-wall classroom, or yeah?
I think in my school time, yes, it was a very small school. We used to sit outside as well, but somehow I enjoyed it, sitting outside, learning, not just like, restricted to four walls. I mean, we sat outside, we discussed, geography, maps outside. It was not, it was not like restrictive to one place. And I think in my college in India, it was, you could say it was a privileged institute where I went. So everything was there. In the beginning, yes, it was not, but like eventually, because it was in constructing phase, so it came as a privileged institute. So
Understood. Thank you very much, Divya. Professor Kim, you have had the rare privilege, at least on this panel, of having been a student, a professor, as well as a minister. What was your experience with your learning space when you were young, when you were designing them? What was it like?
Well, talking about learning space, anyway, when I heard and find the learning space as a subject of today's dialogue, well, learning space has many meanings, many different meanings. I mean, from student atmosphere, the relationship with the teachers, everything. But first, I think learning space is classroom, school buildings, something like that. Important hardware for education anyway. And learning space, it reminds me, what Mr. Peter Drucker said earlier. It's in 1997, well, 23 years ago. He was, as you know, well-known, famous writer and scholar in management science, right? He had an interview with magazine Forbes about the future of university. What he said at that time is that, quote, well, 30 years from now, so for this moment, 7 years from now, right? 30 years from now, the big university campus will disappear and will be relics. Universities won't survive. It is as large a change as when we first got the printed books. Right, it was a prediction. And frankly, I did not believe it 23 years ago. I said to myself that it's exaggerated. But this year, we already arrived at this point. All the schools are closed and the school buildings become useless. Maybe we don't need learning space. I mean, school buildings. All the lectures and courses are given through internet. I mean, we are now living in revolutionary age. So, evolution. It's not an evolution. I mean, if we, let us to find the negative system, negative effect and positive systems, what we had already during our experience, that may not be important. We have to reimagine the education and we have to redesign the education. So I believe rather than past experience, the future is more important. The imagination is more important than everything. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Professor Kim. So you do raise a good point of you've pinned down learning experience as classroom, and you've also raised the point that we've now transitioned from the physical to the digital. Mm-hmm. Do you think even the digital space online, would your definition of learning experience also apply to that? Would you want to add to that? How online spaces are becoming useful, and also what are we missing from the physical that we might need to incorporate in the online?
Yeah, when I was a president of university 10 years ago, I urged to my professors to give a lecture online because it's future, I believe. But practically a few professors have done that. But this year, 100% of professors are obliged to give it through internet. And I think, well, of course, it is due to pandemic. Well, I think we will have vaccines and medical treatments next year, but education may not go back to normal stage. I mean, it's a new normal. Mm-hmm. So it has crossed the river of no return because students find that it's rather convenient. They can hear the lecture whenever and wherever they want, not necessary to be at a given time, at a given classroom. Well, they can hear 2 times and 3 times when it's too hard to follow. And which is interesting is that they can hear it with 2 times or 3 times faster than normal speed when it's easy to follow. I believe students' preference is quite important. So, in that sense, learning space will be soon totally different. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Professor Kim. We will come back. Yeah. I'll come back to you on what we are losing from
sure.
physical learning space. Anam, you've heard from Professor Kim his conceptualization of a learning space and how that is changing. And I want to ask you, in your school, when you went to your school, what were the things about your learning space that made it fulfilling for you? What were those things that made it a very happy place for you?
I think a lot of things do go into learning spaces. So we're not just looking at the physical, but we are also looking at the pedagogical approaches. And though there is, especially at school level, that is whether primary or secondary, there is a lot of emphasis still on rote memorization, or it's a very exam oriented result or marks oriented learning process. So I particularly did not enjoy that pedagogical experience because it was not diverse enough for me, I believe. Today I can analyze myself as a visual learner. I want to interact with the information. So that part I feel it is still missing at school level. So the idea that Professor Kim shared with us, I feel while technology, it definitely has to be integrated with learning. But for Pakistan, for my context, we cannot just yet give up on that face to face, that physical presence, because here we have a lot of issues of internet accessibility. Because just to take a second and talk about accessibility, first we had the physical accessibility issues. Today we have the internet accessibility issues, and the latter is a greater number. So while trying to adjust with the new normal, we want to perhaps still uh, address our existing accessibility issues.
Okay, okay. Anam, yeah, and let's eat this cake of ours bit by
Okay.
bit. Okay, we have about 40 more minutes to get into the real issues, like inclusivity, which I think is very important and we must discuss properly. But before we do that, let's try and disentangle the issue that we are dealing with here. And so back again to you. You did mention pedagogy, for example, pedagogy as a critical factor with regards to whether the place where you are learning was a happy place, a place of joy or not. In addition to pedagogy, what else? I remember in the online, I read one comment which was like, oh, the classroom was painted blue, and that meant a lot to me. What else? What else? What are these tiny little issues that made a difference, for good or for bad, in your learning space?
Definitely. So within the classroom, all of these things do make a huge impact. How the classroom is set up, uh, how visually attractive, engaging, and retaining it is for the student. But for me personally, it was the outside, it was the playground. I am a very athletic sports person. So whatever girls team we had, I was on it.
Mm.
So uh, for me, that aspect, I believe, it was more attraction to me.
Okay, wonderful. And you think that was not integrated into the former part of the space, was it, or was it not?
How do you mean?
The like the playground, for example, were things like playing, the playing spaces, were they integrated into your formal learning, say in the classroom, or were they two separate?
They were separate in the sense that we had a certain time period to interact, to engage in those physical activities, but not outside, not as part of a class activity that now we're going to go into the school garden and engage with the different herbs that we just studied in the text. Not like that.
Would that have been great if that integration had
Definitely.
been done? Okay, okay.
Definitely.
Thank you, Divya. Yes, we've now picked on, say, the space, things like even the painting, things like even access to nature, for example, and in addition, of course, to pedagogy and curriculum. What other things made a lot of difference for you, for good or for bad?
I think first I want to answer your question, and then I will build upon what Dr. Kim and Anam just said. So for me, actually, assessment was major part of all the learning space and experience. For example, it's a universal consensus made by people that assessing whether students can state the facts is very easy, but assessing how students can identify the facts or identify why the facts have been used, how they are used, is very difficult. So in my school and in my college life, I think there were people who made assessment, this complex issue assessment, very transparent. For example, they used to not ask like closed questions, state yes or no, state true or false, or just state the fact. They used to ask questions like, okay, tell us about what concepts you have learned, how you have understood that status motivation, status, how you build upon that. So these were like interesting part for me. um, and now building upon what Dr. Kim and Anam said about like technology, integration of technology in learning spaces, yes, I do believe that technology in learning space has increased access to education, has increased interaction like we are having right now, for example. And but I don't see technology oriented education system as a only viable alternative to the current education system, because at present time there are so many social economic divides, but now with the rise of edtech there is a digital divide. And we can't, because of rampant inequalities to access technology. Yes, again, the good part of technology in learning spaces is like the model of the teacher or professor is like shifted from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, because students are learning more by themselves. They are searching for content by themselves. So the role of teacher has been changed with the introduction of technology. But I see this only as a catalyst in the process of forming new education. I don't see as the catalyst, because we have to come up with so many other catalysts as well. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And yes, Professor Kim.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. Well, I mean, online education is not our future. That's okay for knowledge transfer for certain fields. That can be done by online. Humanity or social emotional skills, which are more important than everything, cannot be done through internet. So face-to-face education should be important. It should be kept. I mean, so I think the future education will be maybe hybrid one. We will take advantage of online and offline from both sides. That's what I'd like to emphasize. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kim. So before I close this chapter of this part of our dialogue, now that we've understood the issues that we are dealing with, and I want us to discuss technology properly, because I think that is very important for this dialogue. But before we do that, so I would like to put up a poll to just gather our dear audience opinions as well on this. And then we deep dive into technology as well. And I've seen a lot of questions coming in. I will now, because most of them are very much related to technology, I will be integrating them into the second part of our dialogue today. So let's try and quickly maybe try to respond to these two questions and see how everybody is feeling or felt about their learning spaces, whether they were happy places for them or whether they were unhappy spaces for them. And then maybe based on what we've discussed until now, we will then know what issues we might need to address. As we wait for the results, I'll come back to the results in a bit. Professor Kim, maybe help us transition to the next phase by whatever we've discussed until now. We've come up with components like the space, the accessibility to nature, infrastructure, and things like that. These very important components of a learning space. Of course, I'm going to ask you a question that might seem very stupid, but which I would like you to shed some light on. What is the relationship of these components to the overall learning experience? How do they contribute to the learning experience? And yeah, maybe if you could shed more light on that.
Well, well, before that, let us rethink or reimagine about the education. What is it, education? Well, education is, although we have lifelong and adult education, it is for young generation, for coming next generation. Education is work for transferring the knowledge, wisdom, experience, technique, etc., from the old to young generation, right? In this respect, education is for preparing the future. Then how we can make a good preparation for the future? This corresponds to how we can make a good education. Well, I believe the answer is that we can make a better education when we know about the future. But future prediction is impossible. It is true that the only thing we know about the future is that it will be quite different from now. However, I think we should try to find something about the future, and we can do it because some part of future is already with us. It's around us. We can describe some distinct shape of the future society. It's not prediction. I think I can point out three important aspects of future society. And the first point is that, well, we will live in super longevity society in future. We will live, particularly for the young generations, as Anam and Divya, you will live up to 120 years old, maybe more. It's not hype, it's a science. And the second point is that future society is a super intelligence one due to artificial intelligence and quantum computing, etc., technology advancement. The third point is, well, already as we are connected, even we are so apart, we will live in super connected society. It's a big change, and we are in ongoing revolution. We have to find, it's better to find a new education system for this future society. It's very near future, I believe. So we have to hurry up for that. Well, let me talk about the super longevity and why the current education should be changed. When I was a teenager, saying a half century ago, the life expectancy for human being was only 70s. It was, as you know, even for the citizens of the advanced countries like US at that time. So the education was designed for a life which retires from social activity at around 60. And after 10 or 20 years of retired life, the full life is over, pass away. But for teenagers and for young generations right now, they will live up to 120, maybe more. This means that the retirement at 60 around is absolutely unreasonable. When you retire at 60, then how you can manage your life up to 120? Therefore, the young generations will be engaged in social and economic activities at least until the age of 90s. They have to earn and have to make money up to 90. I mean, so education should be changed for this super longevity society. We have to deeply concern for necessary change in education. We are still keeping the old paradigm of education. So I believe it's an issue of very much importance in education. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Kim. And now I think you've raised wonderful points with regards to the changes that are beginning to unfold in this sort of a very knowledge-based, intelligent, and advanced society as compared to the past one. And you also raised a point of how education has pretty much remained stagnant over this period, which for the last time, maybe before I move to Divya and Anam, do you think when you went to school and today, in your experience, is everything still the same, or a few things change with regards to specifically maybe learning experience or learning spaces?
I don't think there's no fundamental change. Okay. Of course, we have new buildings, and well, the teachers, they have they used chalks and but now they are using PowerPoint and computers, but fundamentals, there's no change at all.
Okay.
They kept even it has been keeping for 200 years, so there's no change.
Thank you, and that makes this process of reimagining education very important. Now, Divya, now let's try now and understand the technological part of this change. So, it was all physical. We could play, playgrounds. We could hold hands with friends. These very small things that we were able to do in a physical world, we are not able to do anymore. We've transitioned wholesale, literally, to the online. Of course, in some places, schools are reopening again, but in most places, it is like this right now. As a student, what do you think you've lost, or what do you think you are missing? What do you think the online part is not able to provide?
I think is very self-explanatory, all this socio-emotional stuff. I mean, being a PhD student, I still miss interacting face-to-face with people. I mean, like sitting like always in front of computer, I mean, it can be also, not just counterproductive, could be also dangerous, right? Physically, mentally, too much pressure. I think it's not just me. Everybody is facing this kind of stuff.
But you can build social emotional skills online.
I mean, but do we have that kind of infrastructure to build social emotional skills online? First, you need to diagnose how to build, then you have to come up with solution, and then you have to come up with the right technique to build all those things. And this is a long process, and we have just shifted online, like in March, right? Completely online. We are not ready to just learn online, let alone building social emotional learning skills online.
Thank you. Now, Anam, and I'll be reading two questions which are very related to the question that I wanted to ask you. There are two questions from our audience. There is one question from Jenny Foster, and I'll read both of them at once, and then you can respond. The first one is digital learning, and it's very close to what Divya was saying. Digital learning can be a very lonely place to be. How do we overcome that? And so maybe when you respond, maybe try and personalize it. How do you overcome the loneliness of online learning or digital learning? And then there's another important question, especially very relevant to you, Anam, because you're also working on education and training, for example. how to accommodate the students' individual differences. This question is from Hunza Ganshi. How to accommodate the students' individual differences while fulfilling their basic needs and keeping in mind today's standardized evaluation systems or processes. This is for you, these two questions. Could you quickly respond to those?
All right. So to the first question, how do we overcome this online loneliness? I actually started this practice with my own students in class. And so it is sort of a scaffolding strategy. So in education, scaffolding strategy is like building a support system from within the students. So this is a strategy that I'm still building upon with the students. But the essence of it is the students are present there, supporting each other in their text. So there is less intervention, less interpretation of what I understand, and more exchange of ideas between the students. So one understood one aspect of a concept, someone else would have understood a different one. So I find that for the time being, when we are online, this helps. When students have a more, in person-to-person contact, because that use of language, either it's that comfort of being the same age group, these things play a lot for that. So I find we can overcome digital loneliness by that, by engaging, by creating, just as we do in school. We create these spaces, we put across questions or ideas, and then we start a discussion forum on that. To the second question, how do we accommodate individual differences? And just to clarify, it is particularly about the standardization of assessments, that how do we do that and still, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. But also not just assessment, but even the pedagogy, for example, and other components as well. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yes. So for that, I believe, and for which we are starting to work, is building towards conceptual learning and not just rote memorization. And although this idea of conceptual learning has been around for a long time now, but we are only now starting to see the results of it. So when we say conceptual learning, we are actually allowing more space and pace for the student to catch up. And then they do not have to reproduce the words by definitions. For example, in the school that I am teaching at, we have done away with reproducing definitions by authors. Instead, we go through definitions, but then we ask students to create your own. What do you understand? So in that way, if there is a language barrier, we can address that. This teacher would facilitate. If there is an expression, a barrier, the students are there to lend each other words. So that is both SEL in action and addressing individual differences. And so it is also the need of the time that the assessment, the standardized assessment system is also reformed on those bases, that you do not ask students to reproduce knowledge. For example, a definition by this, who said this. You do not include such questions in exams. And instead, you either give them a scenario, something to work with, an interpretation, and then it gives them more room to express themselves.
Okay, wonderful. No, I think before I let you go, I think you raised a very good point, which I think relates to a question that also came up from our audience, which is something that we were just about to discuss with Divya, which is a question from Anuradha. Anuradha is saying, I can already see how students miss personal interaction in this pandemic. What would happen to learning life skills like empathy, communication, and much more? Now, you just mentioned a few things, but could you give examples to how, say, in your school, okay, how do you build, now that you cannot go back to physical, at least for the time being, how do you build the capacities for empathy, for communication, even through a digital space online? And then maybe if Divya could build on that.
So I would just give, this is an example from a real life. Just before we closed for winter vacations, we actually had this online anonymous exchange of letters of hope. This was actually in line with the mental health week we were engaging in. So this is the month of October, I believe. Yes. So in that, I had asked my students to anonymously write letters of hope and to give it to each other, and then we also put it online. We created a Padlet wall so everyone could access this. And the idea behind it was, there will be hard days, there will be tough days, there will be days you will be alone. So these are the letters of hope that are accessible to you. And if you need to engage on a more personal, individual level, I believe that is the role of teachers, to be emotionally available. And obviously it is a very heavy idea, and even a greater responsibility for the teachers. But over the years, I have come to realize, whatever we project to our students, the behaviors, they will imitate those back. So if you are more emotionally understanding, accepting, acknowledging of feelings, the whole range of it, the students will imitate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. Letters of hope. I remember we were working on a publication once, and it was one activity that we recommended to a lot of people, to just write letters of hope and share them with their digital friends, for example. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Divya, could you build on that? And maybe could you take the student's perspective and try and answer the question also, how do you try to learn empathy or other very physical-centric, if I might use that terminology, physical-centric capacities or competencies like empathy, communication? How do you build those online now that we don't have an option of going back to the physical, at least for the time being?
Yeah, I think it's a really complex question or a complex exercise. One has to come up with, so many solutions. I mean, indigenous solution. I think, like what Anam said, like compassion, empathy, you can also, train online. For example, you can have like day of compassion exercise, like tell students how compassionately they lived that day. Just write about your experience, and then it will be like, it's an example of action teaching. I think these terms I learned from, I don't know, so many other people working in psychology or sociology, that you don't just teach any random thing, but it should be reflected in their action. So if you are teaching compassion, tell them to write about what they did compassionately throughout the day. If they helped someone, just write about how was the helping experience. If they I don't know, like helped somebody cross the road or helped in other household work, just write about that experience and then like submit it. So it will be like some day of compassion exercise. Something along those lines could be done online, because You just have to think and write about your experience.
Thank you very much, Divya. I'm getting bombarded with a lot of questions online, and it's a challenge to try and accommodate all of them. But of course, we're going to try. Professor Kim, there is a question for you, which is also very useful for me to try and tie this part of online and the ideas of accommodating all students' need. For example, the question is, and it is from Dr. Latha Ramakrishna from Bangalore. Dr. Latha is asking, Professor Kim, are there any universal strategies to sensitize teachers towards diverse learners and methods to train teachers to become a didactic expert? Again,
I don't think so. I don't think it is not yet provided, maybe, but I don't know. That is quite necessary. Yeah. Anyway, I mentioned earlier that there's no fundamental change in education. Well, fundamental change, I mean, which is like that. Well, for long lifespan for young generation, well, when you graduate from high school or university, what do you get? Well, we get this certification that you are a learned people. If your major in university is mechanical engineering, then you get the diploma, which certifies that you are a learned people in mechanical engineering, right? It should be changed because the ability to continue to learn during the long life is most important. We need a diploma which certifies that you are a learning people, not a learned people. I believe we have to think about in education how to raise people who will learn for life with a lot of motivation. That's the fundamental change that I'm thinking. Yes, yeah.
Thank you. I totally agree with you as well. I don't think there can be any universal standards. Of course, there could be basic things, but unless that fundamental change is enacted, I don't think even much can happen. Before I move to the last part of our discussion, which will be on safety, inclusivity of online learning spaces, for example, for all learners, I want to share the results of the polls that we did earlier. 47% were very happy with the overall learning space. About 38 are neutral, 38%. And then how unhappy were you? Yeah, about 69% are neutral and about 26. So you can safely say that it's neutral with regards to the experiences of individuals with online learning spaces. Now, there's a question on, the move to the online space as taken with it the inequalities that existed in the physical. In fact, if there's anything that maybe online learning space has done is take those inequalities with it. But on the other hand also, and I was reading a comment from Sorina from Romania online, who was saying that it has also been useful in a sense that, it can provide a lot of alternatives with regards to inclusivity, for people who learn differently, for example. Maybe online is a little bit better for them as compared to the online, to the offline, for example. People can listen to podcasts, which were not the same in class, if for them learning through hearing is far better compared to the other ones, for example. But we are struggling with the balance, of course. We are struggling with the balance of trying to say, okay, these are the few things that we take from the offline. These are the few things from the online, and combining those properly. Why is that? Why are we not getting the balance right? And if any of you could respond to that, maybe Divya first and then Anam.
I think I want to begin with an analogy with the current pandemic situation. For example, if you have fever, it could be because of a virus or a bacterial infection, right? But if you have fever, I don't want to give you, and fever because of virus, I don't want to give you antibiotics because it could be dangerous, counterproductive, everything. So what we are doing right now, we look at problems, and there is this temptation to come up with immediate solutions. We are not looking for treatments or solutions that are coherent with the existing education system, and that's the causing the problem with not having the right balance. And I think and to how to gain that balance, I think one need to identify the right treatment. I mean, there are so many treatments available. One, first we need to analyze the system. Like I agree with Dr. Ananta, like he said last time, we need to understand education system as system, be it online or physical system. And then according to that, we need to come with treatments or all these balances. And I think that's causing the problem, that's causing this unbalance, that we are just picking random treatments and just immediately putting it in narrow sense.
Thank you, Divya. No, I quite agree with you. And on the one hand, even when we try and maybe this is a question to Divya, to Anam, because we've left a lot of people behind with the transition to the online. Initially, when learning spaces were physical, at least we were able to, at least as much as possible, get everybody on board, however unequal. But the problem with technology is, yes, it can equalize a lot of things, but at the same time, also we've left a lot of people offline in places like in Africa, even parts of South Asia, for example. In a lot of places, not a lot of people have the privilege. And I remember Patrick was bringing this up. Electricity is not even available, forget internet access. So I'm struggling to try and find the balance for these people that we've left behind, for example, technologically. How do we still reach out to them in this era of pandemic? And I think that is also a question. A lot of questions along those lines are coming from our participants as well.
Yes, that is definitely one of the major concerns at present. That fundamental question, at what cost do we proceed? That just in our context, we still don't have a number on how many students have actually dropped out this year, but they estimate it to be as high as 70%. And these are just random numbers, right? So the out of school was already a huge issue, and now it's being added on. So the question remains, uh, accessibility. How do we engage them now? And definitely, perhaps we need to think at it a different way. In this manner, we are thinking, bring them online, as in they have a device of their own, a laptop or mobile, and from there they connect with us. But what if we could go, rudimentary, essential? What if we still engage through classrooms? What if we engage in the standard operating procedures that have been put in place? And there we bring technology within class. That is still more doable at present in these constricting contexts, at least, that bring technology to them. Practice these SOPs, these hygiene and physical distancing protocols, but then bridge these gaps with the help of technology.
Thank you. And just to extend that, but there's also, even when we are able to bring a lot of people to the online, I think we've tried our best, of course. Even when we are able to do that, the problem is, as we said earlier, we've removed these interactions that used to happen in the physical place. And so what has been taken to the online are these, 1 hour into 5 times lectures every day, for example, online. And and a lot of things related to mental issues are beginning to come up. So let's say mental health, for example, and this ties very closely with a question from Shruti, and how do we deal? Of course, it's very specific to you, but I also want to open it to the panel as well. Is how do we deal with the mental health issues that are coming from this wholesale transition to the online, for example? How can we make our online learning spaces, we know we are restricted, but how can we still reconfigure them in ways that we can begin to address issues relating to mental health as well? And also, in extension, even things like the gender dynamics, for example, how do we do that? The things like safety, for example, which is a question that Maitri and others are bringing, the dark side of technology. So how do we reconfigure? And we need to look at it from the positive side. How do we reconfigure these spaces to try and accommodate issues relating to mental health and also gender dynamics as well, and safety? Yeah, maybe if you could continue, and then maybe Anam and Divya and Professor Kim can weigh in as well.
That is a very complex question, in the sense, previously we had, we gave these responsibilities of social emotional well-being to teachers, to counselors at school. But with going online, I think the responsibility has now shifted to individuals, to everyone. That is both to students and teachers. Be available to each other, be kind to each other. And because at present, I cannot think of, a plan. How do we engage everyone? Because mental health issues are on the rise. So there has to be a more collective and more individualized approach with this.
Well,
yes, Professor.
Online education has just begun. We are obliged to do that this year. Yeah. There are many problems, of course. When we have light, there's always shadow. So we should do our best to minimize the effect of shadow side. We have to find the problems and we have to solve it. I believe we can solve it. That those kind of problems, if we know exactly, then I think we can solve it. But still now, we don't know because we have just begun. But I believe it's our future. Part of future, as I mentioned, online and offline, that should be used in mixed form.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Divya, could you weigh in on the mental health issues and also things like even bullying and safety concerns as well?
I think frontline providers are also parents. We also need to include parents and family members when it comes to mental health issue as well, I think. And I mean, last time also when we having this target, I mean, I asked many people that why, if all these things are on such a high rise, why there are not means of, telling about all this stuff through newspaper or through television or through radio. I mean, why only internet? I mean, we should also include these things on like online learning as well, right? because many people just can't access internet. There should be something about in magazines so that parents can read. I think throughout India and throughout world, people read newspapers, right? There could be stories in newspapers, there could be something in radio, right, about all that stuff, so that at least they should be aware about what are these things. Then they can talk about within the community. I mean, family, community members should be aware of these things as well. It's not just teacher and students. These are also like frontline providers when it comes to online learning or in general learning. We tend to forget these people.
No, thank you. No, I agree with you. And yeah, we can learn through gazettes, for example, through newspapers. It need not be just internet. I think we've just taken, and I think in privileged context, online refers to, of course, this. But
exactly.
For others, it is, things like even television or newspapers lessons as well. But thank you very much. Now, maybe to wrap this up, to begin to wrap it up, let's now look into the future. I think we've discussed the components of learning spaces, physical as well as digital. We've tried to unpack issues of say safety, inclusivity as much as possible. And I think we've come back, which is a consensus that is emerging, is that online or learning spaces in the future will be blended. And I think it's something that Professor Kim said very well, because online will stay. It is here. It will stay even after the pandemic. But online also is limited in a sense that, there are a lot of things that are very important in the physical space that are not in the online space. And so we are coming towards the middle path, which is blended. Now let's now take this and look into the future. So say post pandemic and even beyond, what are key examples, very concrete examples of blended physical or blended learning spaces that are inclusive, safe, and as much as possible accessible to as many people as possible. Could you maybe share from your experiences what could some of these examples look like in the future? So blended learning spaces of the future, what would those look like? Professor Kim, would you want to start?
Yeah. Well, currently, when there are 30 students in classroom, in elementary schools and universities, whatever, well, teaching is mainly for middle-level 10 students. It's boring for high-level 10 students, and it's also boring for 10-level low-class students. Of course, it's better to know the level of each student and teach for each one by one, But it's too big burden. It's almost impossible job for teachers or professors. But when we have online courses and using artificial intelligence, for instance, then that kind of problem, I believe it can be solved very effectively through online by using AI, artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Perfect. And before I hand it over to Divya, but what about the ethical concerns? What about the moral concerns or the dark side of artificial intelligence? Do you think we are able to find a right balance, or are we just adopting artificial intelligence the way it is as well?
That is really a big issue, very important issue for our future. AI, artificial intelligence. Well, I believe nowadays already many ones are worrying about it. And I hope we should have an international organization for our life. in AI for ethical issues. When it is used for weapons, for instance, then it's amazing. It's horrible. So we should really care the ethical issues in AI application everywhere in our life, right?
Thank you. And Divya, yes, blended learning spaces of the future. What would they look like? And key examples would be great as we try and wind down.
I mean, I haven't personally see like a concrete example of blended learning space, but theoretically it could work like learning space which also emphasize on what is happiness, what are well-being, and then focus on the content learning. I mean, then it could be, a balance. I mean, I think I only know example of one country, I think Bhutan, which not only introduced the concept of, gross national happiness as to measure the overall development of the country instead of economic development models like GDP or GNP, but they also introduced this happiness curriculum like in their schools or universities. I mean, I just know these examples from theory. I don't know how it looks like. So I think it's really important to tell students about like online, because they're now online bullying as well, right? What do we mean by all that stuff? And then go away with content like of subject of mathematics or any subject like arts, humanities, anything. So first start with all these ethical, moral concept, and then go over with other stuff.
Thank you, Divya. Yes, Anam, over to you. Have you seen examples?
No, not at present. I mean, we are working in a hybrid model of teaching and learning at present. And so the lackings of each, we're trying to balance them out. For example, there are some things I like about online. I have more access to information and I can guide that access to my students. Diversified sources of information and that aspect of learning from more developed contexts. So I like that about online. So we try to integrate that, balance that, the key elements that you are highlighting, the emotional aspect of it. How do we still develop that empathy in students? And we try to complement that with the physical face-to-face classes and models. But again, it is still in experimental stages. And so I feel in order to, put an image of what the future would look like, we need more people on board, more sharing of, best interventions, what worked in your context, more information sharing, more people-to-people contact. And that would really help everyone.
Thank you. I think as expected, this was going to be a very complex discussion or dialogue, given the complexity of the issues that we are dealing with. There are so many other questions that I would really love to answer, but then we are running out of time. But quickly, if I will be reading this question to the specific person, and if you could take 30 seconds, because I want people who came to listen to us today also to feel that they were also part of the dialogue. And so the first question is, how do we build solidarity among students, especially in digital learning spaces? And this comes from Shah Jalpa. Anam, could you respond to that very quickly?
there has to be, we really need to develop that student agency that we talk about a lot. And that is, ownership of your own learning and development and that of your fellow student. And so when that ownership or ideation, what we read about in theory, if you practice that, we could develop on that.
Thank you. And then for Divya, these are going to be rapid fire rounds, okay? Divya, there's a question for you from Jeremy Dizilwa. For Ms. Divya, do you think the use of debates and presentation of ideas based on knowledge can be used as tools to develop confidence and critical thinking in digital or in learning spaces, for example? How do we use these tools? Yeah.
I think by sharing these kind of platforms more and more so that these discussions reach to more people, and also implementing whatever we discuss to every level.
Thank you, Divya. Professor Kim, there's a rapid fire question for you. The question is from Mr. Shaidul Islam. Shaidul is asking, Professor Kim, how to consider the lab-based hands-on learning, particularly for the science students? In the previous physical spaces, you could do experiments in the lab. In the digital learning spaces, how do we do that?
Well, that's a difficult question. But, there are many MOOC courses, so-called massive open online courses. It's for theoretical parts. And again, I believe we can develop a massive open online lab, maybe MUL. So even lab activities can be done in internet space. Why not? Of course, that cannot be covered 100%, but part of them can be covered. So, like in education, that should be in hybrid form. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry, but now we have to close, and so I will give each panelist maximum a minute for their closing remarks, specifically on what would be the key takeaways. Assume that there were students or teachers or policymakers, especially policy recommendations, concrete policy recommendations to ensure that the online learnings spaces of today and of the future are accessible, inclusive, and very safe. Professor Kim, I see you're thinking, so I'll come to you last. So maybe let's begin with Mr. Anam. Mrs. Anam, sorry, what would be those concrete policy recommendations?
Could I take a minute?
Okay, perfect. Divya, have you thought about it?
I think so, yes. I think first we need to understand actors in education systems and relationship between those actors. I mean,
I think we do, Divya, don't you think?
No, not to some extent. I don't think so. We do understand relationship between those actors. Some relationship are very loose. So, and there should be some like design element, like I need to ask what like higher authorities are asking, teachers what to delegate. Are they clearly articulating what they need? I mean, are they asking teachers only to, ask about online enrollment, or they're also asking teachers the learning outcome? We need to ask what they are actually asking. And if they are just telling verbally, like, okay, do this, do that, and they are not taking any information about learning outcome, we can't improve this process of online learning or experimentation because we don't have any information to evaluate. right? We don't have information about how students are responding. We don't have any information about capabilities of teachers. We don't have any information about their motivation. Is it extrinsic or intrinsic motivation? So these things, I think we need to ask to higher authorities, ministries, or district officers, or principals, directors, all these people, how to make online learning like really livable or enjoyable, so that all these things are mixed.
Thank you. You're raising a good point, which is, I think, something you started earlier, which is you've been pointing towards the fact that we barely understand the challenge that we're dealing with. We don't have enough information to ascertain, the consequences of it. And so a recommendation would be for people to step back a little bit and look at it critically and try and ensure that it is aligned to learning that is fulfilling and fun and enjoyable. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Divya. Anam, can I come back to you now?
Yes. And just building upon, Divya actually summed it up brilliantly. So we do need to include, as I said, bring people on board. And these would be not just educationists, but also, perhaps school counselors. What interventions do they suggest? If we are going towards online, as you mentioned, safety, online safety is another concern, emerging concern. Perhaps we can bring on board, LMS experts or developers. What do they suggest best practices be? So just increasing this pool of advisors would be a first good step.
Thank you very much. And Professor Kim, finally to you.
Well, whatever the education method, online or offline, which is important for future generation, is the most important one is wisdom to live together in society, because it's, as I mentioned, we are all connected. We need cooperation spirit, and it is quite necessary. Well, in Eastern Asia, China, Korea, and Japan, we use Chinese character, which is a pictogram. I mean, the letters are made from the shape. Well, human beings in Chinese character is very simple, just a two-stroke like this one, like this shape.
Yeah.
This means, this guy is leaning on the other, and this one support the other. That is human. That is human life. That is human being. So, whatever the method of education, we have to raise the student with cooperation spirit with each other. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. And I think that is the right way to sum it all up. I think just like yesterday, even day before yesterday, when we were discussing learning experience, we came to the conclusion that if the very purpose is reimagined, if the very purpose is collective flourishing, collective well-being of all human beings and of the environment that they inhabit, then the learning space can be reconfigured accordingly. It cannot be the other way around. And then I think, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the second live dialogue of TAGe reimagining education for flourishing. And I think we've tried as much as we could to unpack the complexities of the things that we were trying to understand. The good thing is at least we've unpacked a little bit the challenges that we face with regards to this transition to the online and the importance of these experiences or these learning spaces to be blended, for example, going forward, whether we have the pandemic or not, because the online is going to stay. And so it is wise that if we could try and find or build bridges between the online and the physical, so that we have a much richer or richer spaces, learning spaces, that at least would help achieve the fundamental aim of education, which should be collective flourishing of the largest number possible. With that, I want to thank Ms. Anam Minhas from Pakistan. Thank you very much for your contribution. Ms. Divya Sharma, thank you very much. And Professor Kim, gratitude to you for all your thoughts and for all your recommendations and active participation today. To our dearest audience, we're very grateful. Many of you stayed with us. I can see the online chat is like more than 100, 200 thoughts have been shared. We had almost 30 questions, of which we've tried to answer 15 to 20 of them. Unfortunately, we had an hour, 15 minutes to work with, so we couldn't answer most of the questions, but we've tried, and we will try and answer many of them tomorrow evening when we discuss the final part of this dialogue series. Thank you very much, and I now hand it over to Mr. Mrudulu Padhyay.
Thank you, Kuany. I would like to thank everyone, just like you. And so this was the end of our second TAGe dialogue on reimagining education. We are going to have one more dialogue in this series, which will happen tomorrow evening. And all of these virtual dialogues and survey will contribute to the Future of Education initiative and the International Science and Evidence-Based Education Assessment. And once again, on behalf of UNESCO MGIP, I thank you all for making time in your busy schedule to join us here this morning, afternoon, evening. Wish you a pleasant day. Thank you.